Hi, this is James Whitaker, ASC, on the Cinematography Podcast.
That was, certainly one of the things we were trying to do along the way was to let everybody know that things aren't really normal in these suburbs. So, and that was what we were working on with the framing. Like, the compositions were really trying to push, if this feels normal, then the camera's in the wrong space. That's kind of what I was working for.
This is Cinepod, the Cinematography Podcast, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. I'm your host, Illya Friedman, and today on our show, I speak with James Whitaker, ASC. He joins us for the second time on the Cinepod. He's also the cinematographer of the major Emmy Awards contender, DTF St. Louis, the darkly comic murder mystery series streaming on HBO. This is his latest work with writer-director Steve Conrad. Their long-term collaboration includes such shows as the noir thriller Perpetual Grace Limited and, one of my personal favorites, Patriot. We dive into how street photography, not cinema, was the right reference point for shooting ordinary suburbs. What led to the unusual set design and lighting of one of the key locations, featuring a brutalist interior that feels right out of Eastern Europe. Engineering a remote-controlled lighting rig for the show's many intimate scenes, so that the mood never had to be broken. This is a shorter episode with just my interview, so sorry if you were tuning in for our close focus and short ends, but fear not, we'll be back with those in our next episode later this week. Enjoy! I'm joined now by James Whitaker, ASC. Welcome back to the show. It wasn't that long ago you were on talking about good luck, have fun, don't die. It was a great conversation. It's a great movie. You're back because DTF St. Louis is in the Emmy hunt right now, and it's a wonderful show. Thank you so much for being back on to talk to me about it.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here again. Thanks a lot. Thanks. I love the show so much, so thanks for having me.
So, okay. Let's talk about the show. For the people out there who haven't seen it, how would you summarize it? How would you describe DTF St. Louis?
It's a show about male friendships. It's a story about David Harbour's character plays an ASL translator at a weather station. He works, his boss, sort of loose boss, is Jason Bateman's character named Clark. And these two guys find a friendship together, sort of a kinship. Each of them need different things in their lives. And it starts out fantastic and warm and bubbly, and then it gets fairly dark.
It does. It gets dark. It gets dark pretty quick. But I love dark shows. I have a very dark sense of humor. And the show itself, though, is not particularly dark. It feels like the look of the show doesn't... I'll say it betrays sort of the undercurrents that are constantly going through it. Tell me about the conscious effort, the philosophy that you and the creator of the show put into coming up with this look.
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting. So I've been working with Steve Conrad for 10 years now. This is our fourth show together. And there's a lot of trust between us. And when I read these scripts, I really didn't know where to go. It's pretty interesting because our other shows like Patriot had built-in looks like Europe, and Paris, and then Perpetual Grace was a Western. And so, it had these landscapes. So
yeah, when you think of St. Louis, it's like, what does St. Louis look like? Yeah,
exactly.
So you've already got to come up with something original because St. Louis is not like, the poster child for the setting of so many things. And did you shoot in St. Louis for this?
We didn't shoot in St. Louis at all. We shot in Atlanta. But yeah, that was kind of the challenge for me, and I knew that was going to be the challenge. And kind of what was giving me anxiety up front was how to find a look for the show in these sort of ordinary suburban suburbs where there's not a lot of spectacle going on. There's not a lot of drama going on, just from the architecture of the place. There's nothing that really offers it. So it became sort of this idea like, where do we start? And I was literally scrolling through Instagram. It doesn't sound very inspiring, but... and I came across an image of Sharon Tate from 1968 sitting at a cafe in Paris, and it just had this beautiful quality to it. She's sitting there in this sort of light blue sort of shirt, blouse, and it's at a cafe, and there's these gentlemen in the background wearing cool leather coats, and it just had this really gorgeous quality to it, like really strong blacks. You could tell it was shot on slide film. Had sort of a warm skin tone. And, kind of the found nature of the image the photographer was a guy named Jean-Claude Deutsch. And what he did with that image, it just really struck me. And I literally reached out to Steve and said, what do you think of this for the look of our show? As far as like the look, as far as the blacks, the sort of slightly muted color palette. And he was really on board with it as sort of a jumping off point. It kind of led us to sort of start studying more street photographers. And that seemed like a good place for us to start because, the suburbs are pretty ordinary. So I kind of love this idea that maybe 6 or 7 of the greatest street photographers in the world kind of showed up in this suburb and, would sort of capture it from an observational point of view, from an ordinary observational point of view. And that sort of was the jumping off point from it.
I think that's really interesting. Is that typically a way you like to work too, is by not necessarily Instagram, but finding a reference image, an image that really speaks to you, and then working with your collaborators to see how they respond to it?
Yeah, for sure. Whether or not it's a lookbook that includes tons of images, right, from other films or whatever it might be. I really love finding an image, whether it's a still photograph or a painting, and starting there, something that's a little more, not such, part what we constantly see all the time, which is images on the cinema screen, things we always study, right? So it's fun to break the mold for us. That's how I do start. And there are times when I don't look for images at all, if the director will allow it. I don't remember, for sure, like Steve and I, along our routes, have always had we always will find images or things to look at, films, obscure films to talk about. But it may not always start with this is what we want it to look like. It may be that, that scene wants to look like this, or, for example, in Patriot, when Leslie Claret is giving his speech to the whole group, there's a lot of playing with heights of people in the frame. There's 15 people in the frame, and he's standing in front of the group. And Steve came up with this really obscure film called Black Test Car, which is a Japanese film. It's kind of a masterclass in studying blocking of different shapes of people, different heights, and different foreground elements, and where you might place them relative background to foreground.
Wow!
So that's always really fun for us. There were visual cues always usually given by the story. In this particular case, 15 minutes into the show, we find out that David Harbour's character is dead. And we knew that wanted to be a scene at the crack of dawn, shooting at dusk for dawn. And we really had a 45-minute window to get this shot, which was a cable cam shot that started very far away. And the camera moves over this pool all the way into a pool house and finds David Harbour dead on the ground. And, Steve talked about Todd Hito being a great reference for us. Todd Hito's work is always inspiring to cinematographers because it's a lot of beautiful neighborhoods and beautiful houses at night with glowing windows and a lot of fog, and there's always a mood and atmosphere. And so, there's clues like that along the way. Yeah,
it's a really fun show to watch, not just because it looks wonderful, but I think Stephen Conrad has a sense of humor in all the work that he does that comes through. And it's a little dry, and it's a little bit askew. It's not your typical stuff, but holy crap, does that work for me? I find his stuff like some of the funniest stuff on television, and it's this dark sensibility too. And how much does the humor come into the juxtaposition of how you're setting up the scenes and the shots? And is that always like an element you're conscious of, is how serious or how funny or how straight do we need to play this? Is that?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a general rule about that, and that is that we really don't play the humor ever. It's really rare that we'll make a frame, if ever, and go, this is a funny frame. You know what I mean? It's much more important to us that we're leaning into the mystery of the story and the drama of the story and in some regards, the sadness of the story. And that was another element for us that became very sort of integral to the look of the show was, leaning into the use of black. That was part of the reference photo as well, the Jean-Claude Deutsch photo. It was just had a very strong black level. But I always wanted to play up the shadows on people's faces and in the rooms and play people against windows in full silhouette because of the mystery and the drama. And you're right, there's tons of amazing comedy in this. I mean, like literally, it doesn't get any better than this, And I love it so much, but we're never trying to tip the hat toward the comedy.
Mm-hmm. There is plenty of darkness and shadows and dark shadows. And I have to say that I've never seen a police station in any television series that looks like the police station in DTF St. Louis. That police station is probably the darkest police station I have ever seen ever. And I don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing, but it almost reminded me at moments of like they're almost like a modern art museum or something. Like, can you talk about the intention behind the police station and the police station having this very sort of like modern and stylized look, and how you light these pools of light in people during like interrogation sequences? Tell me about the police station.
Yeah, let's talk about the police station. Yeah. So Laura Fox, our production designer, she and I had a couple of early conversations about what the police station might be, and she and Steve were having separate conversations, and then all of us sort of came together. But Laura and I had an early conversation about what is it that we're going to see outside of these windows, right? Because these are on-stage set builds, right? We built these, every element of that police station on the interior is built on stage in 3 or 4 or 5 different small sets and a couple of bigger ones. And there's always a little bit of anxiety with regards to what are you going to put out the windows? It's like, do you want to use a backing? What's the backing going to look like?
Translight type of stuff, or an LED wall, or
it could be a painted backing. It could be a translight. It could be green screen. It could just be white that you blow out, and then just put a bunch of trees in front of it and break it up. But it's like my instinct was that it should be some sort of backing, an image that was outside the window. But those things aren't cheap to do. You got to send out a photography crew. You have to take the image, and then you have to get the image made in a really large scale,
for sure,
30 to 60 feet tall. And, these things are expensive. And I think when Laura and I started talking about it, I think she sort of clued in on the fact that she didn't want to deal with any of this stuff. And it wasn't a lazy thing. I think it just was uninteresting to her. And I think it really sort of sparked something in her where all of a sudden she got this idea to sort of build a more interior looking police station with very little views to the outside. And so if you look at the police station, it really does feel like it could be somewhere in Eastern Europe, right?
Yeah,
it could be like,
it's not like anything of it. Like I think of like when I first started out my career as working in camera and AC and stuff, it seemed like almost cliche. Every low budget job I did had a police station. It was usually one of like 6 different locations, and they all had pretty much the same like steel desks and filing cabinets and very like traditional bombastic police chiefs. It was a thing you've seen a million times. There's none of that in DTF St. Louis. DTF St. Louis feels modern, but it also doesn't look like anything else. And the first couple times we go to the police station, I was like, where are we? What is this? There's not like a bunch of like billboards and things on the wall. It's like this is somewhere.
No, it's brutalist architecture, and that actually really sort of inspired me for some things I could do photography wise. Like there's a lobby that is really just slatted walls. It was kind of this idea that maybe there are atriums beyond these sort of interior walls that the sun might be able to penetrate deep into the space, And so there's, in this lobby where there's a couple of big blocks that sort of Jason Bateman's character, the first time he goes to, the police station, it's in this lobby, which is meant to be a slightly more informal.
Yes, you're not booked yet. Yeah,
you're not booked. Exactly.
You're sitting in the waiting room on the other side of the glass.
Exactly. But it doesn't exactly look friendly. I mean, there's these slatted walls where
you beat me to the punch. This is what I was going to get to. Even though it doesn't look like any police station, there is the feeling of like foreboding of like, this is not a friendly place. What's going to happen next? Are they going to slap the cuffs on? Who's going to, where is this story going? And I think that has everything to do with the way that space is lit. That I think if it was done differently, it would feel like an entirely different thing, but it doesn't. It feels like it's made to intimidate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And there's, It is, yeah. I mean, those slatted walls, they're literally slats, 40 feet wide by 20 feet tall that, maybe have a slat in between them that's 4 to 6 inches or whatever. And that gave us a great opportunity, to almost play them as if they're prison bars behind Jason Bateman's character.
Yeah, yeah.
And, that was also a huge challenge for me because, when you build a set on stage, you often can't get a hard sunlight far enough away to create a single source. So, I couldn't use a single 20K. Or a single 18K, whatever you wanted to use to create that. So we ended up building this huge bank of Suma panels, Sumalux panels. I think there were 63 of them sort of bound together. They're sort of these hexagonal or octagonal panels about, this big that we sort of tied together in a huge array. And that sort of unit and that approach allowed kind of a parallel beam feel come through these slatted windows, but it had a nice quality to it, like a really nice soft quality to it. And then from there, it was just about shaping the faces as we got in closer.
I really wanted to ask you about the voyeuristic quality of DTF St. Louis. I mean, there are many different situations where someone is reviewing sort of like a video footage, or they are obscured and peeping in on somewhere else, or like there is the whole show plays out like an onion, where it's like you get part of the story up front, and then each episode reveals a little bit more and more, and it's not until the finale that you actually get the full story. But the idea of the ASL communications and even like these long shots in the gym, I'm constantly reminded of how voyeuristic this whole show is. How much of that was a conversation between you and Stephen going into this, or was it something you kind of discovered as you went through, or how does voyeurism play into the show?
Yeah, I think again it starts from the story, and Stephen and I talked about that for certain at the beginning, but it's also years and years of having worked with him that we sort of discovered that that's part of what we enjoy doing, and it made a lot of sense for this story as well. And it also goes back to the street photography thing we were talking about, because it's sort of this observational idea where you might be as if there's a camera inside of a space and you're viewing what's happening through a window, right? Like a frame in a frame sort of. There's a couple good examples of when Floyd's son Richard is throwing rocks at either Jason's house, either Clark's house, or at his own house. And there's the very first time we see him at Clark's house, we're kind of like in a screened-in porch. It's meant to feel that there's like a piece of wood in the right, and there's a piece of wood in the bottom of the screen, and we're observing what's happening through this space, and you're seeing Richard throw rocks right at the house, and then Floyd comes in and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, why are you throwing rocks at Clark's house? This is terrible." And that just was like that's part of the magic of working with Steve, because like I think I might have had the original idea to shoot it from that perspective, but then Steve's like, "Oh my God, wouldn't this be great if if the frame has a right and left edge, and Richard and Floyd are in the bottom right corner? Wouldn't it be great if all of a sudden Clark on a swing set breaks the frame and swings in and says, 'Can I get a little help?'" It's just so much fun. Like,
yeah, that's another perfect example too of like Clark on the swing and being a voyeur with his next door neighbors. But it's like it repeats throughout the show, and it feels like quite often that we get to be part of voyeur as we're watching the show. We're getting to have this experience. There's plenty of POV of the voyeur, and there's all kinds of ways you can stage a scene or shoot a scene where that doesn't come through. But this to me felt super intentional about we're going to put you in the seat of someone who is looking in on what's happening here, and there's all of this mystery, which I'm not going to give away in this podcast, about who done it towards the end too, where you have this grainy video footage that you can't exactly tell like what went down. So I guess my question for you is, you've got these elements, and you're going to put this all together. How does the photography as the reference point, the dark humor that you're playing straight, the voyeurism, how does all of this
cocktail mixed together in order to become the show that you see here. Do you spend a lot of time too planning your transitions and how you're getting from one place to another? How do you take these seemingly diverse elements and make it all, homogenize nicely, how it all kind of fits together?
It is very purposeful. I mean, there's no question.
Oh, no question. When I see all of the shows, when I watched Patriot, I was blown away at how much all of this fits together this way. It didn't feel, and we talked about this a little bit last time too. It doesn't seem like there's coverage because the way you guys shoot, that's not done with coverage. That is very much intentional from A to B to C. And it's the same thing with DTF St. Louis, super intentional all the way through. So how do you come up with the elements to turn it into that intentionality?
I think you're right. Boy, that's a good question. Might have to work on this for a minute.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know if everyone's so self-reflexive about their process. They just intuit some of this too. I don't know if it's like that for you, but I feel like when they're so intentional that there is a thought process, that there is okay, what is going to create maximum impact? What's going to give us, you've got a set way to do it, but you need to provide enough flexibility that you can, if you so desire to, be able to cut into these bigger pieces that you're doing or be able to move things around a little bit. And that's not the same as coverage. That's just giving yourself options. Mm. And so I'm assuming that that's also part of the whole process in your brain too, is how do we get an option out of this? I'm going to frame it. I'm going to frame this house where we can see left and right, but how do we make sure that we can do something with this? It's going to be okay when the swing, breaks the frame. How do we go about it? I'm asking the question. I don't know. It's like it seems like it's 5-dimensional chess or whatever it is. You have to plan these things out. And how do you make that plan?
I think probably 90% of the time it's intentional, and I think, like I said before, we've been doing this for a long time together. So sometimes it just becomes second nature, and Steve says to me, this is what this scene is about, and I sort of intuitively know where to put the camera in that moment. There is sort of a new approach I've been doing as far as working with Steve, as far as offering not just one wide. I'll often do an alt wide at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I might do a wide that's more...
A wider wide.
It could be a wider wide, or it
Okay.
could be just literally
Different
the other.
wide.
Yeah, it could be
Okay.
a different wide that's stranger framing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? More unusual framing. So one might be more square or more symmetrical, and the other one might be more off kilter. Sometimes you'll see all of that used in the show, and some of it, Steve will just make a choice. This is the one that makes sense to me emotionally, and. But for me, and that was, certainly one of the things we were trying to do along the way was to let everybody know that things aren't really normal in these suburbs.
Yeah.
And that was what we were working on with the framing. The compositions were really trying to push, if this feels normal, then the camera's in the wrong space. That's kind of what I was working for. And there are other times where we were trying to make characters feel uncomfortable. Like, for example, Jason Bateman, when he's being, inside one of those interrogation booths, we might do a ton of headroom and him just in the bottom corner of the frame because it wanted to feel like he was a fish out of water. And
It's harder to cut in though when you do sort of unusual framing like that, because then you have to be thinking what's the reverse shot? Is it going to be someone else in another corner of the frame? It's not standard, or either that or in post they then have to crop and reframe.
Yeah.
So
well, I think generally we would shoot the matching reverse. And then we would I'm always trying to give Steve, 2 or 3 other angles that, like a medium and then a close as well. And then also, while we're doing the close, let's get a low close at the same time.
Okay.
And so
I recognize, as soon as you say that, I recognize so many low closes now in my brain that immediately come up. It's like, oh, of course. Yeah. It feels very intentional. Feels like, oh yeah, here's this.
Exactly.
Looking up their nose almost sometimes.
Sometimes,
yeah.
And at the other times looking down slightly on a close up. But that's something that's new for Steve and I. We didn't do that so much during Patriot. During Patriot, it was a different game. It was more like, what's the least amount of coverage we can get and make our day and be happy about it.
It's a very different looking show, though, too.
Yeah.
These are not the same, but they definitely feel like they're from you and they're from Steve, too. That feels like this is clearly the same body of work, but it's a very different style. So, and I love that. I think that's what's great about it.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about intimacy. There's a lot of intimacy in this. There's a lot of scenes between the cast members and stuff where they have to get undressed and be intimate with each other. Do you have a playbook that you tend to go to for this? Because can be a very emotionally raw situation for a lot of people. And, depending on how your cast is, it's not always easy to go through. Usually you have smaller sets, closed sets and things. Because there's so much intimacy in this show, how did you approach that?
Listen, it was something that I think there was some anxiety from Steve about, for sure. I don't think he had done a lot of intimate scenes like this. And so we talked about, like, how could we make it easier? And it certainly was going to be a process as normal, where the director speaks to the actors over time, and, you start talking about how are you going to do these scenes? Because there were many, many scenes between Jason and Linda, for sure, where they were going to be not only in mostly unclothed, but also in some very peculiar positions. So
it's in the script.
It's in the script.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, it was something that they got more and more comfortable with. Steve got more and more comfortable with leading up to the time. But, with an intimacy coordinator and all that, we knew exactly sort of how the day was going to go. Now, what I was trying to do was to sort of be invisible during those times, like be part of the blocking, be part of the decision making as to where a camera will be, where the actors will be positioned, help Steve work that out with the actors. But then I really wanted to work out the lighting situation so that they could be not something where in between takes I needed another crew member to run back in and
make some changes.
Yeah. Everybody has to robe up during that time and kind of ruins the mood, as they say.
Of course. Yeah.
So actually, like, really just maybe a week before we started shooting those scenes, I approached my gaffer and Key Grip, and I asked them if they would figure out a way to put a hard sunlight source from outside the window onto a techno crane. So we took a Z head, which is the techno crane's old sort of traditional head, and modified it so it could hold a 24K T12. And that allowed us to be able to adjust the light while we were even rolling. Certainly while we were rehearsing and they were blocking, we could quickly move it, just inches away. And, emotionally, I was looking for lens flares during this time with the two of them together at various times. And we had built key lights inside the room with just some LED lights through diffusion frames that were nice in the right position, bunch of negative fill and all that. But, all of that could be controlled with a board op and outside the set while we're rolling without having to interrupt everything.
Did you, and you're going to have to forgive me here, I can't remember exactly, but was there a creative use of lens flare specifically during these scenes as a way of obscuring what's going on too? Was that part of the intention?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't really remember that being part of the conversation for sure, but it was more like, would love to right at this great moment, have the camera move just inches and all of a sudden
and then
flare.
And then hit the flare at the appropriate moment. Yeah.
And I'm not always a flare person. I'm really not, but it felt right for this.
Absolutely. I was going to say, you have judicious use of flare. I think there's some people who are flare crazy, but yeah, very, very judicious
I'm
use
not
of,
flare crazy? Okay,
I would not have called DTF St. Louis flare crazy,
okay,
but
great.
It was judicious for sure. It's interesting too, because there's moments of comedy, of course, during these intimate scenes. And of course it's played really, really straight. Not always, but there's we're supposed to be as an audience member laughing at these situations that are going on. It's it's interesting juxtaposition. And I have to imagine that it's got to be a challenge to shoot that.
It is. What's interesting is we're talking about this right now. I'm actually having a harder time coming up with the funny scenes in my head.
Okay,
because I feel like the drama plays more through and through. I don't know what you think.
Yes, no, I think you're absolutely right. But I'm thinking that maybe it's the absurdity rather than humor. I should have said. So there's some absurdity that's going on, but it's not ha funny. It's yes, it's like
situational.
Oh, now we're getting more of this story, and I'm thinking very specifically of Clark's affair, and thinking about Clark kind of going through all of his machinations of all of his fantasies that he wants to play out and how that's going. So
right now they're coming to my head.
Yes, yeah. So I'm like, yeah, there's some absurdity in there, and that absurdist humor I think plays really well, because there, of course, keeping it straight. They're keeping it straight the whole time. So,
they are.
yeah.
You know, I love talking about Steve's writing with regard to this, because like it is, some of the stuff is absurdist, right? Like these two playing out the idea that there's a pool boy, you know, or that there's a delivered robot, you know, that becomes part of a sex scene. You know,
Yes,
I
exactly.
love it so much, but it's, you know, it's funny, like, you know, you can think of these things as being absurdist, but the truth of the matter is, I guarantee you it's happened somewhere.
Of course. Oh no, without a doubt. This is what's wonderful about it, though, because it's reflecting of, like, you know, of reality. So
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
but it's not it's not polite reality. It's not the reality that everyone's talking about all the time. So,
Yeah.
but I think that's what's really fun about it.
But I think he uses it, and I think it's what's so interesting about it, and also really interesting for me as a cinematographer to work with, because I can use all these different sort of expressions through photography, is that those juxtapositions are what allows us to become so emotionally vulnerable to what he's trying to say. And often in this particular case, in this particular show, he's talking about loneliness.
Absolutely.
And it's devastating, you know, and it's really devastating. And
It's an epidemic, they say right now, too. We are less connected. Many people are less connected now than they ever have been. And, you know, people blame their phones or society or the pandemic or whatever it might be. But it's like, yeah, this is a show I think is super reflective of the times, which is also wrapped up nicely in a what seems to be a murder mystery at the same time. So it's,
Right.
you know, it's I think it's great when the modern zeitgeist blends into the world of fiction, and it's fantastic because it makes you, I think, re-examine your own life. It makes you think about, you know, things in a different way. When you first read the script for DTF, what did it evoke for you? What did you think when you read it? Other than the fact that you wanted to do it, what was it about that spoke to you?
Yeah, because you just say yes to Steve when he
Yeah,
calls.
exactly.
You know,
I mean, it's
just
like
you don't think about that.
It's
too
like,
much.
you got something else? I'm in. But
What are we doing next?
Yeah, but
well, I don't know if you know this backstory, but it actually initially was a New Yorker article
no, I didn't know
based
that.
on a true story.
Oh, I know. I didn't know this.
And yeah, and so it's now very far from that true story. But at the first elements of the script,
The first sparks.
the
Yeah.
first sparks were
Yeah.
based on this true story about a dentist
Interesting.
who is in a very similar situation. You'll have to check that out. But
Yeah, absolutely.
but yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think I like the fact that Steve, in a way, likes to play in genre. You know, like he likes to play, you know, cops and you know, things that feel familiar to us, you know, as cinema watchers, TV watchers, but then just turns the whole thing on its head. And it's just such a pleasure to watch all the time. And, you know, it's funny, I just finished a very serious sort of true murder show, like, you know, serial murder show based on a book. And, you know, it's as dark as Seven. And there is no comedy. And when you cut, there's never laughter. And it's interesting how that affects the set and people's moods, because on Steve's mood, you know, literally almost every take, as soon as we cut, or sometimes even while we're rolling, Steve will just break out laughing. And, you know, it's like laughter is an instant vacation, and it allows you to sort of like really enjoy things. And I really love playing in his world. Like, it's just great.
Well, I'm not going to ask you to go into this new thing that is, you probably can't go into, that is all that's coming soon. But I do want to talk about other aspects of your career because, you know, as great as DTF and Patriot are, you have had a whole, you know, career long before your collaborations with Steve Conrad. So, and we didn't get into this last time we spoke. I remember we spoke about Patriot a bit, and we mostly spoke about Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die. But how did you get the bug? How did you get started in this crazy career?
The bug started when I was in high school, maybe a little before that. I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago in a town called Winnetka, and it's where John Hughes was making all of his films. Mm-hmm. And so we would see their trucks, we would see their film crews. We had, you know, friends that were extras on their sets, 16 Candles and all that. And we had a bit of a system where if one of us saw that there were some film trucks or like a shoot going on down the street, the other one would run with a quarter to the payphone back in those days.
Yeah.
And call a group of friends, and we would show up on our bikes and watch. And I remember multiple times when we did that, and just watching the process of, like, you know, the amount of work it takes to I didn't even know what was going on, to be honest with you, you know.
Well, when you're that age and you're not involved in it, it's like just, you know, it looks like a bunch of trucks and people standing around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But they were filming in downtown Winnetka. You know, it's like, And that happened multiple times, and I was inspired, and I also just love watching movies. So I was like the kid that watched 3 to 4 movies a day, during the summer. And
it's pretty fun when you're a kid too, and there's stuff being shot around you, and then you get to see on the screen where you're like, I know where that is.
yeah,
I've been there.
Right.
I've seen that. Was that your experience too with the Hughes
absolutely.
films?
Yeah. When the principal from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, steps into an empty frame and then flips up his glasses. That is right outside a location that I went to all the time.
That's awesome.
So that kind of started the bug, and then I went off to college as an economics major. Didn't quite know how to get into film, and they had a film program there, and a bunch of my friends were film majors. And once I finished my economics major, I had about a year and a half where I was taking photography classes and film classes, and then just trying to work on these guys' sets as much as possible. And then as soon as we graduated, they moved to LA. I came a few months later, and they were already working on Snoop Dogg videos, and they helped me get some PA jobs that quickly turned into AC jobs that landed me at Roger Corman, as
in
a
Venice?
loader. Yeah, in Venice at Concord Studios.
I worked there. When were you there?
I was there, let's see, this would have been 93, 94.
All right, you were about 4 years before me. So,
Okay,
but
got it.
yeah.
Wow, I didn't know they still existed at that point.
They did. They lasted through 99, I think.
Okay.
And that was kind of the end of it. So
Yeah, but then it was like doing, loader jobs. On those, it was like loader, then you become a second on the next shoot. And instead of $200 a week, you make $250 a week, super low budget. But
and anyone who's watching this or listening to this who thinks he's joking about $200 a week, he's not. That is absolutely,
exactly.
these are real dollar amounts. These are like sub minimum wage,
That's right.
definitely illegal. But people, when they want something bad enough, they get into this.
But you got to grow up fast. You got to
true.
start getting opportunities that didn't even make sense.
You learn a lot really quickly. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So was there something memorable that you worked on at Concord? Did you shoot something while you were at Concord?
No, I was never DP there. No, for sure not. I actually started to beg my friends to let me become a PA in commercials because they were making
way more money than
that same dollar amount per day.
Exactly.
And so I quickly got out of that. But and then it was just like, in commercials, it's a really interesting thing because as a cinematographer too, but you get to try so many different things in commercials and music videos. That's kind of the golden thing about it. It's fantastic. They're often short, but also
you get to experiment on somebody else's dime.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. But also as a production assistant, when you're 23 years old, 24 years old, you're exposed to these incredibly talented people, like a different person every week back in those days. So it was like, I was working on sets with John Toll and Conrad Hall and Paul Cameron, and the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, they're okay.
They're okay, and then you get inspired. One of my great inspirations was it was a commercial for Hanes, and the cinematographer was Harris Savitas, the great Harris Savitas.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah.
And Peter Lindbergh was the director, and it was a black and white thing. And he and I had already done a few jobs with him, and I was sitting on the camera truck cleaning filters, and he came over at lunch and was like, you've been on a few of my jobs. I recognize, thank you for cleaning the filters, but what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do what you do. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, maybe one approach would be to stop doing this and go buy yourself a film camera or Bolex or borrow one.
Yeah.
And then convince all your friends to become directors and make them hire you. And that's pretty much how I approached it.
Really? Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So, did you go buy a Bolex or something?
I bought one within 3 years.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, and
there's a longer story.
Was it
there.
wind-up
it's a
Bolex?
wind-up Bolex. We still use it. We still have it.
Wow.
Nicole,
all right.
Nicole, my wife, is also a cinematographer. We use it quite a lot. She's kind of amazing with that thing. But yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So then, which of your friends did you convince to become a director and then go on to shoot something?
There's a few. Are
they still doing it?
Some are still doing it. Yeah,
really? Okay.
absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
back to the Bolex, by the way.
Yeah.
There's some 16 millimeter footage in DTF St. Louis of Linda Cardellini and the umpire. That's that same camera.
Yes.
Yeah, that's literally the same camera.
Yes, that's great. That also is a wonderfully absurd bit of that show, which I just love. Is all the umpire bits.
The umpire bits. I love the shot that Steve designed this. It's fantastic. Floyd comes in the bedroom, and he's like, "Hi, Caroline," and and you cut to the reverse and you see just Carol's legs, and you're like, wow, this is a really intimate, possible, beautiful moment. And then she stands up and she's got the umpire massive pads on.
And this is and of course it's Floyd's like obsession too. So it's like, it's like he was really turned on by the pads, which is like it's a whole thing. So this is what's great about the show. The show is it continues to surprise you when you think that you might have got the story figured out, then there's something new and there's some extra details, some extra morsels of how it all plays out. Let's go back to you. So
sure.
So you've got your friends, convince them to be directors. You've got a Bolex. You're starting to shoot stuff. What's step two? How do you go from shooting your friends, projects on a wind up Bolex to then getting paid to do what you do?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of luck for sure, a bit of being in the right place, right time. Doing low budget music videos for next to nothing, or maybe nothing. But it's like, to me, that's part of it. And it's what I always try to tell young filmmakers is don't miss out on those opportunities. Don't be unavailable for that stuff. Like, make sure that you can say yes. And that's a big deal. But yeah, so I started shooting low budget music videos that turned into commercials. And then pretty quickly I started getting like very small $150,000 movies, that led to another $400,000 movie that led to a $4 million movie. And then after those 3 films, then I got a movie called The Cooler.
I love The Cooler. It's great. It's a story about a professional cooler, someone who cools off the tables in Vegas. So right. I didn't realize that. I should have gone through your filmography more closer, but I remember that movie really well.
I mean, it was amazing. And actually there's a great story there because, it was Alec Baldwin, Maria Bello, Paul Sorvino. I mean, it was a really great cast. And we shot the movie in Reno, and one night we all went out, cast and crew, and went to a craps table.
Oh, wow.
And I think we were like 3 rounds in, and maybe I've had a couple cocktails, and I literally said to the dealer, I'm the cooler.
Oh, no.
And Bill Macy told this story on Good Morning America like a few days later, or like a couple weeks later, because I got thrown out of that casino so fast because they knew what a cooler was. It just proved to Bill Macy that it was a real thing.
Oh, wow.
And he loved that story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So they literally came over and said, you have to leave.
You have to leave. I was totally tossed. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. All right. So sounds like The Cooler was a real turning point for your career then.
It was, yeah.
All right.
And right after that was a meeting with Jason Reitman for Thank You for Smoking. Mm-hmm. And we made that film. And it's been a nice run.
Jason Reitman has done so many great movies too over the years, phenomenal. So
he has, yeah. We remain good friends, and I've shot commercials for him. I've not shot any more films for him. Our good friend Eric Steelberg shoots all his movies.
Eric Steelberg's been on the show too, and I think of like movies like Up in the Air and Juno and stuff like that. Yeah, really, really great stuff. I'm a big fan of Jason Reitman.
Yeah,
so,
me too.
Yeah. So that's really exciting. So it's like the rest is history. So that basically catches us up to today. Or
I guess so.
Any other turning points or big milestones you want to?
Well, it's not always like the next one builds to the next.
Not at all. It's
plus.
It's kind of like when you look at the stock market, and sometimes it goes up and sometimes it goes down. It's like that's every freelancer's career.
That's right. So, yeah. And then you got to make interesting and difficult choices because you do things like have children.
That's right. If you want to have a life in this industry, it's like
that's right.
You got to pick a partner who's understanding about what it is that you do. Fortunately for you, you've got someone who understands exactly what you're up against.
That's right.
But if you're going to have kids, let's talk about that a little. Like how old is your child or children?
Yeah, my boys now are out of college. They're 23 and 25.
So you made this decision 26 years ago, 27 years ago.
But it was around Thank You for Smoking that I made a hard choice to stop doing longer form projects outside of town. And that was kind of a bad time because I really had like good momentum going with these sort of small independent films that were starting to gain a little bit of, I was starting to have bigger meetings for bigger movies, and I was saying no to things that I probably should not have said no to if you asked, your career advisors at the time. But if you ask your heart and you say, listen, for the next 10 years, the only thing I'm going to shoot out of town are commercials. Because those tend to be at the most like 10 days or less or whatever.
Yeah, they don't usually want those to drag on too long. They want to keep those within a reasonable budget.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to be able to do that. But like, certainly there was another stumbling block that I would have to get back into. For a while, I was lucky. There was still a lot of work in Los Angeles, and so I was able to string together a couple films. And by the way, I love shooting commercials, so I'm always happy with that. But
let me tell you, I know many DPs who, if they could only shoot commercials, they would actually say they'd be very satisfied. There's something super satisfying about being able to tell a story in a short period of time and be able to do it well and be compelling. So it's like, also, just the amount of money you make per day is lovely, comparatively, quite often to longer format projects.
That's right, yeah. But it was right around, I think it literally was the time, I'd done a documentary called Montage of Heck, which was about Nirvana, about Kurt Cobain. And that was an interesting sort of like smaller project with a different kind of director, documentary director. And it got me to exercise different muscles again. And I was like, all of a sudden I was like, I really, really need to get into telling narrative stories again. And so it was right around that time I got a script for Patriot. And it was just that time, and that was kind of the next turning point of the career, right? So I got that opportunity to go up there and shoot the pilot for Patriot in Montreal, and then that was back when it was still a pilot system.
That's right.
It was Amazon Prime, but they were really just getting going. They really didn't know, they were still kind of using the old model for pilot, then greenlight a season. So a year later, we shot season 1 of Patriot, then season 2 of Patriot, and so this is the beginning of the Steve Conrad journey.
Okay. Just as an aside, and I don't remember, but was Ted Hope at Amazon at that time?
He was.
Yeah, because Ted Hope was just on the show, and we were just talking about all kinds of stuff. But like, that reminds. Patriot was one of the first shows that I remember seeing on Amazon that really made me sit up and take notice that Amazon was serious about this, and Amazon was like really going after like premier top quality stuff, like Emmy nominated stuff. They were really going for it. So I think that as far as those days of Amazon too, it was like that was the real launching point for them. And Ted, of course, went on to until very recently grew that whole department over there.
Yeah, got Ted was our exec at Amazon when we did Troop Zero.
Okay. James, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking me through DTF St. Louis and going through your career here. And before we go, is there a place online that people can find you? Do you do an Instagram or have a personal website or anything like that?
Instagram is definitely the best place. It's James Whitaker _DOP.
All right. We will put that in the show notes over at camnoir.com. Thank you so much for being on the show.
It was really fun. Thank you for having me.
This has been Cinepod, the cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory at hotrodcameras.com. Watch and subscribe to our show on YouTube or listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow and interact with us on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn, but not X. Don't do that. Thanks for tuning in.